One of the stories that I've been following with a little bit of interest has been this notion of the Great Resignation of 2021. So here at Interview At, where I focus on helping people learn how to use the Amazon leadership principles to land their dream job, what I've been noticing more than anything else is some of the commonalities in the interviews I've been doing. And more often than not, what I see is a certain set of things that happen over and over again. We'll talk a little bit about that. But the kind of meta point is people aren't standing out. They're not. And I think the reality of that is in the way most people prepare for their interviews. Much like you, when I used to prepare for interviews, I would do research on the company and I would try to imagine all of the questions I might get asked about things on my resume. And it turns out that that's a fairly inefficient way to prep for your interview. And so a lot of the feedback that I give to candidates who come through Interview At, sign up for your free mock interview at interviewyat.com, is to not think about story preparation, but not to think about like specific question preparation, but more to think about story preparation. We'll get to that in just a moment. The reality of this Great Resignation, right? There was a research study that was published. I think it was a professor at the University of Texas, Austin, maybe it was Texas A&M. I'm sure I should source this, but it basically said that 40% of all employees intend to quit their job if they were asked to return to work as a result of this loss of work from home or work remote feature of their job. Which, look, it makes sense. There's value in working remote. There's value in having more control over your calendar. I think more than anything, I think people are realizing just how much time they spent in their cars, which is a bit nutters. I many years ago made a decision to quit my day-to-day work for someone else's job and started my own firm. So I had more control over my calendar. And now that I have an office here about 3 miles from my house and my commute takes 5 minutes and I can come and go as I please, the effect on my own personal mental health has been ridiculous and just a net positive all the way through and through. So there's an interesting thing that comes with changing jobs, right? So it's presumably these people that are going to resign from their jobs, they're going to look for new jobs. Here's something that just doesn't get said enough, and really, most employers would hate me saying this out loud, but the reality is every time I've changed companies, not changed jobs, changed companies, my salary has gone up. That's true for the entirety of my career, and that generally is true for most people. Look, there's obviously service jobs and things of that nature, which kind of have their incomes and salaries kind of pegged a little bit, but in some of the more, we'll call them white-collar knowledge work type jobs, many of whom are the types of people who come to me at Interview At, when you change jobs, change companies, your salary goes up. Why is that? Well, this was relayed to me when I took my job at Amazon about my pay at Amazon. But basically, it was a Jeff Bezos statement, which is, we're paying you for who we think you're going to become, and even if you exceed that, we've already paid you. That's what you get paid. Just kind of his mentality on how he paid. I don't know if that's true. Never heard him say it. I just, it's one of those kind of folklore things. But the reality is when a company hires you, they're hiring you what you think you're worth at that moment. They might give you a little value for what you might be worth in the future, but you kind of get stuck there. So unless you get promoted and it's a well-run company and they've got pay bands and they understand that, when you get that new next level job, they're going to increase your pay. And even then you might be in the lower bracket and they start talking about compa ratios and, you're at the 50 percentile for your level, blah, blah, blah. When a company's trying to hire you and they really want to hire you, they're going to pay you what they believe you're worth. And more often than not, that's more than what you're making now, which is great. But just understand that once you get to that company, you might be fixed a bit in your salary. So in changing companies, right, as part of this Great Resignation, there's an opportunity for you to increase your income, which is great. Similarly, there's a hiring shortage going on right now. People are finding it very challenging to hire for many roles. I see this at many of the companies that, through my primary advisory firm, the hiring has become a challenge. And so sometimes the only lever that you really have as a company, especially if you're not like a tech company where you can talk about, massages and food and, laundry service, et cetera, but you're like just a normal kind of run-of-the-mill company in the middle of the country, really it's all about flexibility in your calendar, right? So that's the remote work thing, and then pay. Right? So with a hiring shortage, you can expect pay to go up. Now that kind of feeds into inflation. I'm not getting into an economics discussion here, but that is a reality, right? So even though your pay is going up and there's inflation, you could actually be net worse. But the combination of changing companies and a hiring shortage will mean, in general, pay is likely to go up. The kind of flip side to all of this, though, is with all of these people supposedly going to resign from their jobs, there's going to be a massive flood of people on the market looking for jobs. And I don't know how many of you have tried to look for a new job in the last, call it, 36 months. But getting past applicant tracking systems and the automated resume submission, kind of using AI to read through your resume to figure out if you're right for a role, getting just past that and getting a look from a company is difficult. And so with that, what do you do? How do you stand out? Well, the good news is there is a way to stand out in your interviews, and it's a lot of what I teach with Interview At, which is think about, just kind of take a step back and think about what an interview is. You have submitted your resume and you've got past whatever gates you need to get through, but now you're walking into a company and you're going to meet with, on average, 4 to 6, 7, 8 people over the course of a handful of hours, call it, between 4 hours and 8 hours. And you're going to try and convince these people that you're right for the role, that you're the person that they want to hire. And that is your job at that point. But take a step back and think about this for a second. Did they prepare for your interview? Like, you've prepared. You've done a ton of work. Did they prepare? By that, did they look you up on LinkedIn? Did they read your resume? Did they actually come with questions pre-scripted, ready to go? They kind of understand what they're interviewing for? Chances are probably not. And so the reality is they're going to meet you for the first time in that room. They haven't really thought about you. You're going to spend 45 minutes to an hour with them and hope that they remember you on the way out. So really, it's on you to stand out. It's on you to put your best foot forward and present in such a way that they come out of that room thinking, well, this person already works here, obviously, so now we just need to find him a job, right? And so one of the things I teach, and this was my secret hack and kind of how I prepared for all the chief product officer roles and VP of product roles I was interviewing for kind of circa 2013 to 16, was in how I was preparing, right? So I used to spend a ton of time, I don't know about you, but I'd spend a ton of time and I'd try to envision all of the questions I might get asked about things on my resume, and oh my God, the stress and the time commitment. It was like a second job. But what I figured out as my secret hack was to use the Amazon leadership principles as a way to frame my preparation. Why do I do this? Well, if you think about the actual interview process at Amazon, which is actually a really well-run process, the leadership principles are used and kind of handed out to the interviewers. Like, this is what you're going to focus on. You're going to focus on dives deep. You're going to focus on delivers results. Everybody understands their role, and that way you can get a holistic picture of the candidate. Okay, so how can you use this when you're preparing? Literally every behavioral question that has ever been asked can be mapped to at least one leadership principle. That's point number one. Point number two, when you think about every role and level, but for every role, job family, there's a set of leadership principles that matter the most, that are likely to come up in the types of questions you get asked. And so, I have a grid that I maintain. I'm just going to look at my screen here. Doing it from memory is always sometimes somewhat hard as I get older. But if you think about, I'm a product manager. So what should I be most worried about? Customer obsession, hands down. That is, no matter the level, customer obsession, you always have to be thinking about that as a product manager. Delivers results, hands down. Always have to be able to deliver results as a product manager. Then things kind of vary based on the level of the position, right? So if you are a, principal product manager, kind of mid-level, or a more junior product manager, ownership matters a ton. Matters a bit less when you get up into that chief product officer, VP of product role, because you have a team of people working for you. Same thing with invent and simplify, right? You're more likely to be coming up with the things versus managing the things, the lower in the organization you are. However, as a senior leader versus a more mid leader or junior leader, our right a lot matters a ton, right? So preparing for how to show and demonstrate that you've been right a lot. You make good calls. Same thing with hire and develop the best and insist on high standards. That's your job as a leader, is to kind of hold the line. Thinks big, bias for action across the board as a product manager. These are things you need to be thinking about. And kind of similarly tied to invent and simplify is dive deep. How into the weeds can you get? That's more of a junior and mid-level, not so much a high level, although you are, depending on the company, you need to be able to kind of hold the line on getting in the weeds. Now, things change a bit. That's product manager. Let's talk about software engineering, right? So think big matters. Insist on high standards matters. Similar as a product manager. But when you think about our right a lot, doesn't matter the level if you're a software engineer. You have to be right a lot. You just can't be turning in bad code. So if that becomes one of those, it's not level specific. I would say more junior roles, especially at the engineering level, learn and be curious matters, right? Because you want someone that you're going to hire that is going to constantly be improving themselves, constantly be picking up new technology, constantly learning, etc. The meta point here is when you think about what leadership principles might matter the most for your product family, your job family, it allows you to prepare in a way in which you're preparing stories that map to the leadership principles, as opposed to, I need to think about every possible question I might get asked and have a good answer, and essentially be setting yourself up for 8 hours of improvisation on the day of your interview, which is just a disaster, right? Because you're going to get asked any question. If you can listen to the question, just listen to the question. Rule number 1 of PR: never answer the question you're asked, answer the question you want to answer. Well, listen to the question, mentally map it to a leadership principle, then start to answer the question you were asked, but bridge to your leadership principle, right? So when you're asked a question about, one of the ones I use all the time is, walk me through the most complex system you've ever designed. Okay, that's dives deep. Easy dives deep to identify. I may have, if I'm prepping for looking at my resume, prepping for an interview, I may be ready to talk about any number of bullets on my resume, but I may not have framed it that way. What is the most complex thing I've ever designed or developed? Here's why this helps. When you think about a dives deep answer, the most complex thing you've ever developed, it doesn't matter what you've done, it's specific, of course, for tech companies, but you're going to have a story about the hardest thing you've ever worked on, right? That's a dives deep. What's the hardest thing I've ever worked on, and how can I talk about it? How in the weeds did I have to get to solve this really, really hard problem? What's the thing that required me to spend an inordinately more time than I needed than I thought I was going to need, because it was so complicated that no one thought anybody could do, right? That's understanding the leadership principle of dive deep and taking your answer and going and delivering against that, versus I prepared for, well, tell me about this thing on your resume that is X. Okay, that's easier, versus what's the hardest thing, if I look at your resume, the hardest thing you've ever had to do? Well, a little bit easier, still a bit vague. What is the most complex thing you've ever designed? You probably didn't prep for that because you were looking at your resume, and then you're now thinking about, oh shoot, what's on my resume? Is it sufficiently complex? What if it's not there? Why wasn't it there? That just induces panic, right? So in prepping for stories that relate to your leadership principles, it allows you to kind of take that one step removed in your preparation and think through just note cards, even a series of stories that map to those leadership principles, so that when those questions come in, because they're always going to be somewhat vague, right? Tell me about a time when you overachieved against goals. Tell me about time you begged for forgiveness instead of asking for permission. These are all questions. Literally, I put them in the comments. Test me if you want. Put in the comments. Name your behavioral question. I will map it to at least one, if not more, leadership principles. When you can do that and do it comfortably, it removes so much stress from the interview process. And here's why it matters for the Great Resignation. You are going to stand out when you are in your interview storytelling versus improvisational extemporaneous speaking. When you start a new job at a new company, you go to lunch. Okay? And they're going to ask you, whoever you're with, 1, 2, 3, 5 people, hey, what'd you do at your last company? You're going to get a lot of those types of questions. Same thing that you're going to get in an interview, just a much more relaxed setting. When you can enter your interview process thinking, well, I'm just having lunch with a person. Yeah, of course, you're sitting at a desk or you're over Zoom or whatever. But if you process it as, I'm just having lunch with somebody that I just started working with, and I want them to come out of the room thinking, wow, I'm really glad we hired that person, and I'm just going to tell them stories about stuff I've worked on. Think about how much more relaxed you can now be in your interview, how much more detail you're going to have in your answers, because you're talking about something you are comfortable talking about, okay? You're not going to be making it up on the spot. There's an old Seinfeld routine about people's number one fear is speaking in public. Not death, but speaking in public. So they're more afraid of speaking in public than death. Okay? An interview can very much be 4 to 6, 8 speaking in public performances to an audience of 1 using improvisational content. Like stress on stress on stress. Versus, ask me about the story about how I met my wife. I've told that story a billion times. I never tell it the same twice. It's 1,000 monkeys on 1,000 keyboards. They tell the same story, generally, but I'm so comfortable with the story and talking through it, I can get interrupted, no problem, go right back to where I left off. I can jump forward or backward in the story, no problem, because I'm comfortable telling it. And this is the key. This is like the French kiss. Chef's kiss? French? I don't know. That's just a blooper. Chef's kiss on your answer, which is, you've identified the question as the leadership principle dives deep. But depending on who's on the other side of the table, you can now tag your answer with stuff that might be relevant for them. So How do you think about this for your product manager? If I'm a product manager interviewing with another product manager, it dives deep, but I might also talk about delivered results. Well, here's what was really cool, but it actually showed up and it was great, versus a salesperson where I might want to talk about dives deep, but how did I earn the trust of those who were dependent on me to deliver this answer, right? You can now tag your answer with little 1 to 4 sentence snippets highlighting a different leadership principle that elevates your answer, makes you look so much better than everyone else who's coming in, and you're clearly going to stand out, but 2, it just improves your executive presence. And I use the word executive, but it's just your presence. What is your presence in the room? How comfortable are you with the material, and how comfortable do you make the people listening to the material, and do they come out of that thinking, wow, they've accomplished a lot. So there's a real opportunity here in the Great Resignation, if this kind of unfolds as everyone thinks, where a lot of people are going to be changing jobs, for you to be earning more money at a company you're more happy working at, that more aligns with your values as far as how they value work and your time. All great. But with all of these people coming into the marketplace, you're going to need to stand out. And how you stand out ultimately will come down to how you interview, which is what we aim to do here at Interview At, is helping people leverage the Amazon leadership principles to stand out from a crowd and perform better and ultimately get their dream job. So if this content is helpful for you, it's super helpful if you hit like or subscribe to the channel. It tells YouTube that we're doing good stuff. If you want to set yourself up for a mock interview, go to interviewat.com, sign up there. It is a bit busy. I apologize. I do these for free, and it's not my primary business, and so the schedule can be a bit thin. I apologize. You can always send me email. Flattery always works. Sometimes I move my calendar around to help people out if they are in need, but don't come to me with I have my interview with Amazon, I have my interview with Microsoft, I have my interview with Facebook, whoever, name your company, in 3 days. I need an interview. That's not going to work. You got to do a little bit of planning. All right. We'll talk soon, and look for the next video later on this week where we do a bit of work on delivered results.